Hi friends, this is your pal Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons and the brand new starter set that's coming out, which is Heroes of the Borderland. So Tejas Abadia got an actual copy of this coming out of PAX, I think it was PAX West. And he did an unboxing, and I was really surprised to see there are 3 adventures in the box. And I want to talk about what those adventures are. So there are 3 adventures in the box, and each is a very thin pamphlet, like a very thin, not a pamphlet. It's the same size as a D&D canon hardback, but I think they look to be like 32 pages each. Very, very thin, right? So 3 adventures: Wilderness, Keep on the Borderland, and Keep on the Borderland is it's a huge, epic, extremely famous Dungeons and Dragons adventure, and that's really important to understand that this is being, this entire set is coming off of this incredibly iconic, historic, quite famous adventure for Dungeons and Dragons, like a specific module, right? And that's another thing coming out of Dungeons and Dragons 1 and first and second edition. There are these really famous modules. They were soft cover. They're usually about 64 to maybe 128 pages max, and they had like B8-01, and there were just dozens of these, right? But some of them were quite famous, and many of them are being revisited within Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. So you have Wilderness, you have Keep on the Borderlands, and finally you have Caves of Chaos. All 3 of these, they're not new. These are revisits of old classic modules that are much beloved. So what is new is the approach of the Heroes of the Borderland box set. Everything is high color. Everything, it's class boards, it's cards, it's tokens, and it's making your character sheet look like a console, like a spaceship's console, and players are playing down these cards onto the class board in order to are playing down these class boards in order to determine what advantages their characters get. And the class board is showing it, right? Which is huge, because to get the same benefit you would before, first of all, you'd have to own a $50 playbook, player's handbook. And those advantages were spread across like 8 pages of your class, right? But then in addition to that, the feats were over here and the equipment was over here. And so I think Heroes of the Borderland is saying we've got to begin to move beyond the physical book and give people more tangible ways to interact with their character sheet. And we've got to allow the character sheet to grow into this physical collection that each player has. And that's another thing, is like we have the starter set, and that comes in a box, right? But going forward, you're going to need to actually apply boxes. You'll need boxes for players to keep their stuff. That's another thing I hadn't even thought about with Heroes of the Borderland, is what happens now when players want to take their character home. That's not really possible, right? But it will be possible if these class boards are printed, right? Which I think is going to come very, very quickly. And so what the player character, we're going from a character sheet to a character box, right? And in that box will be your deck of cards, your class board, your tokens, right? Your spells, which are also on cards, your weapons, which are on cards, your feats, which are on cards. And I think with the class board too, we get this idea that you may be able to change what a weapon does or what a spell does based on where it is positioned on the class board. This is a massive, massive innovation, specifically in the Dungeons & Dragons character sheet. And I think it's a movement toward The character sheet being specifically a character box. Every single word you just heard in this video is my humble opinion. Nothing more, nothing less. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider like, subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.